I thought she was just another homeless woman. I had no idea she was testing me, and that a cup of coffee would change my life forever. If you've ever wondered whether small acts of kindness truly matter, stay with me until the end of this story. What happened to Evan Carter will restore your faith in humanity and show you that sometimes the people we overlook are watching us more closely than we could ever imagine. Before we begin, if you enjoy this story, please hit that like button and comment with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. The pre-dawn darkness still clung to the streets of Portland when Evan Carter pushed open the door of Riverside Cafe, the small bell above announcing his arrival to the empty room. The fluorescent lights flickered to life with their usual reluctant hum, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor and scratched countertops that had seen better days, probably 2 decades ago. Evan didn't mind. This place, with its chipped mugs and vinyl booths held together with duct tape, had become something like home over the past 3 years. More than his actual apartment, anyway, which was just a place to sleep between the relentless demands of single fatherhood and survival. He moved through his opening routine with practiced efficiency, coffee machines first, then the pastry case, checking what hadn't sold yesterday and what absolutely needed to go today. His hands worked while his mind ran the numbers it always ran. Rent due in 8 days, electricity in 12, and somewhere in there he needed to figure out how to afford new shoes for Danny. His 6-year-old son was growing faster than Evan's paycheck could keep up with, feet bursting through sneakers like they were made of paper. The math never quite worked. Every month, Evan performed the same desperate calculus, robbing Peter to pay Paul, stretching dollars until they screamed. He'd gotten good at it, the way you get good at anything when failure isn't an option. When you have a kid sleeping in the next room who depends on you for everything, you learn to make impossible numbers add up. By 6 a.m., the first customers began trickling in. Construction workers grabbing coffee before their shifts, nurses ending night rotations, the scattered insomniacs and early risers who populated the quiet hours before the city truly woke. Evan knew most of them by name, knew their orders by heart. It was one of the few pleasures of the job, these small human connections that made the minimum wage and aching feet worthwhile. "Morning, Evan," called Marcus, a regular who worked at the shipyard. "Usual?" "Large black, 2 sugars, blueberry muffin," Evan recited, already reaching for a mug. "How's the new grandbaby?" "Keeping my daughter up all night," Marcus said with a tired grin. "But worth every sleepless hour." Evan returned the smile, though something in his chest tightened. He remembered those sleepless hours with Danny, except back then he'd had Sarah beside him, taking turns with midnight feedings and diaper changes. They'd been a team, partners against the chaos of new parenthood. That was before the cancer, before the medical bills that bankrupted them even with insurance, before he'd held her hand and felt it go slack in his, leaving him alone with a 2-year-old and a grief so vast it had its own gravity. He pushed the memory down with the practice of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. There was no room for grief during morning rush. There was only coffee to pour, orders to take, customers to serve with a smile that had become as automatic as breathing. She appeared at 7:30, the way she had every morning for the past 3 weeks. The first time Evan had seen her, he'd assumed she was homeless. Everything about her appearance suggested someone living on the margins, the oversized coat that had seen better years, the threadbare scarf, the worn canvas bag she clutched like it contained everything she owned. Her hair, gray streaked with white, hung limp around a face that might have been 60 or might have been 80. Poverty had a way of making age impossible to guess. She'd stood at the counter with coins spread across her palm, counting them twice with trembling fingers. "Coffee," she'd said quietly. "Just small. Black." The coins in her hand added up to $1.30. A small coffee cost $2.50. Evan had seen the calculation in her eyes, the same desperate math he performed every month, and something in him had simply refused to take her money. "First cup's on the house," he'd said, filling a large instead of a small. "And it looks like we've got some toast that's about to go stale. Would you be doing me a favor and taking it? Otherwise, it's just waste." It was a lie. The bread was fresh, but it was the kind of lie that preserved dignity, and Evan had learned something about dignity in the years since Sarah's death. He'd learned how it felt to accept charity, to stand in food bank lines, to let his pride dissolve in the face of his son's hunger. He'd learned that the way people gave mattered almost as much as what they gave. The woman had looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her pale blue eyes, before nodding slowly. "Thank you," she'd whispered, and made her way to the corner booth in the back, the one partially hidden by a support column where the light was dimmest. She'd return the next morning, and the next. Always at 7:30, always with her handful of coins, always accepting his lie about day-old bread and complimentary coffee with quiet gratitude. Other customers noticed her, of course. The cafe's regulars were a mixed bunch, some kind, some indifferent, some openly hostile to anyone who reminded them of the city's growing homeless population. "You're encouraging her," Marcus had mentioned on the fourth day, not unkindly. "Give handouts and you'll have a dozen more in here tomorrow." "She's not hurting anyone," Evan had replied, wiping down the counter. "Just wants a warm place to sit. Health department won't see it that way if she's camping out." "Then I guess they'll have to take it up with me." The conversation had ended there, but Evan caught the look sometimes, the way some customers shifted away when the old woman shuffled past, the wrinkled noses, the rolled eyes. It made him angry in a way he couldn't quite articulate, this casual cruelty towards someone whose only crime was existing in their space while poor. By the third week, she'd become part of his routine. 7:30. Watch for her arrival, have coffee ready, grab whatever breakfast item looked least likely to sell, bring both to the corner booth without comment or ceremony. "Morning," he'd say, setting down the cup and plate. "Morning," she'd reply, her voice like rustled paper. That was usually the extent of it. She didn't want conversation, didn't invite questions. She'd sit for 2 hours, sometimes 3, nursing her coffee and staring out the window at the street beyond. Occasionally, she'd pull a worn notebook from her bag and write in it with a pen attached by string, her handwriting shaky but deliberate. Once, Danny had been with him. The daycare closed for a holiday, no other options available. His son had approached the woman's table with the fearless curiosity of children everywhere. "Hi," Danny had said brightly. "I'm 6. How old are you?" Evan had started forward, ready to intervene, but something stopped him. The woman's face had transformed. The hardness that usually resided there, the defensive walls that poverty builds, had melted into something soft and surprised. "Very old," she'd said gently. "Old enough to have forgotten what it's like to be 6. "It's pretty good," Danny had informed her seriously. "Except for homework. Homework is terrible." "I remember," she'd said, and there was something in her voice, an ache, a longing that made Evan's chest tight. "I remember thinking exactly that." Danny had chattered for another minute before Evan called him away, apologizing for the interruption. But the woman had smiled, actually smiled, and said it was the best part of her morning. After that, when Danny was with him, Evan let his son bring the coffee and toast to the corner booth. The woman seemed to brighten on those days, speaking more freely with the child than she ever did with adults, asking him about school and friends and favorite foods with genuine interest. "Why is she so sad?" Danny had asked one evening, his 6-year-old intuition picking up on something Evan felt but couldn't name. "Some people carry heavy things," Evan had said carefully. "Things we can't see. Best thing we can do is be kind." Like how we were kind to Mom when she was sick? The question had hit Evan like a fist. Danny rarely mentioned Sarah directly. Those memories were fading now, replaced by the photographs Evan kept on the mantle and the stories he told to keep her alive in their small family of 2. "Yeah, buddy," he'd managed. "Exactly like that." Now watching the old woman settle into her usual spot, Evan prepared her coffee without conscious thought. Large, black, hot enough to warm her hands, but not so hot she couldn't drink it immediately. A blueberry muffin today. They'd made too many, and these actually were getting stale. He brought both to the corner booth, setting them down with a nod. "Morning," he said. She looked up at him, those pale eyes studying his face with an intensity that was new, almost searching. "You're a good man, Evan Carter," she said quietly. It was the first time she'd used his name. He didn't remember telling her, but she must have heard other customers use it. "Just doing what anyone would do," he replied, uncomfortable with the praise. No, she said, and there was absolute certainty in her voice. "Not anyone. Most people wouldn't see me at all." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning Evan didn't fully understand. Before he could respond, the door chimed and a group of office workers entered, voices loud with Monday morning complaints. The moment broke. "Enjoy your breakfast," Evan said, and returned to the counter. The morning progressed in its usual rhythm. Rush hour peaked around 8:30, a controlled chaos of orders called out and fulfilled, money exchanged, small talk deployed with efficiency born of practice. Evan moved through it all on autopilot, his body handling the familiar tasks while his mind wandered. He thought about the woman's words. Most people wouldn't see me at all. There was truth in that, wasn't there? How many times had he walked past homeless people on his way to work, averting his eyes, pretending not to notice their cardboard signs and outstretched cups? He wasn't proud of it, but survival had made him selfish. When you're drowning, you can't save others. But coffee and toast, that was different. That was such a small thing, barely a sacrifice at all. The cost came out of the cafe's waste anyway, food that would be thrown away at day's end. If feeding her cost him his job, that would be one thing. But it didn't. His boss, an absentee owner who cared only about the monthly numbers, never looked closely enough to notice one extra muffin here, one complimentary coffee there. By 10 a.m., the rush had subsided. Evan was wiping down tables when he noticed the corner booth was empty. The woman had left while he was busy, her cup and plate neatly stacked, a handful of coins beside them. Exact change for what she'd received, carefully counted out. Every morning she did this, leaving payment she couldn't really afford for food he'd given freely. The gesture touched something in him, this insistence on dignity even when accepting charity. He always put the coins in his pocket rather than the register, planning to return them tomorrow, a cycle that had repeated itself for 3 weeks now. But when he reached the table, something else caught his eye. The worn notebook lay on the seat, forgotten, or perhaps deliberately left behind. Evan picked it up, intending to run after her, but when he reached the door she was already gone, disappeared into the morning crowds with the completeness of someone who knew how to be invisible. He stood there for a moment, notebook in hand, debating. He shouldn't read it. It was private, personal, none of his business. But she'd left it. Had she meant to? Back at the counter, during a lull between customers, Evan opened the notebook. The pages were filled with careful handwriting, each entry dated. Not a diary exactly. There were no Dear Diary salutations, no detailed accounts of daily activities. Instead, brief observations. November 3rd. The man with the tattoos held the door for me today. Didn't meet my eyes, but he held the door. November 5th. 2 teenagers laughed as I walked past. One said, "That's so sad," like I couldn't hear. The other said, "At least she's not our problem." November 8th. Evan gave me coffee again. His son asked why my hands shake. Evan told him some people carry heavy things. First kind words I've heard in weeks. November 12th. Watched a mother scold her daughter for staring at me. "Don't look at people like that," she said. But the child smiled at me first. Children see people. Adults see problems. Evan stopped reading, something uncomfortable churning in his gut. This wasn't just observation. This was documentation. She was recording how people treated her, cataloging every interaction, every kindness and cruelty. Why? He flipped forward past pages of similar entries until he found one that made his blood run cold. November 15th. Dr. Matthews says 6 months, maybe less. Strange how that number means everything and nothing. 6 months to see if anyone notices. 6 months to find out if I matter without the money. 6 months to discover if I'm more than what I own. 6 months. Dying. Testing people. Evan's hands trembled as he closed the notebook. Who was she? What was this experiment she was conducting? And what did it mean that he'd passed some test he hadn't known he was taking? The door chimed. Evan looked up, half expecting to see her returning for the forgotten notebook, but it was just another customer. He served them mechanically, mind racing. He should try to find her, return the notebook, maybe offer real help? If she was dying, if she was alone. But even as the thought formed, Evan felt the familiar weight of his own limitations. He was barely keeping his head above water. His savings account held $37. His checking account would be negative in 3 days without his next paycheck. He'd been buying Danny's clothes from Goodwill and telling himself the kid didn't notice or care. What help could he possibly offer? That evening, after closing, Evan brought the notebook home. Danny was already in bed, exhausted from school and aftercare. Evan kissed his forehead, adjusted the threadbare blanket, and retired to the kitchen table. His office, his sanctuary, the place where he fought nightly battles with bills and budgets and impossible choices. He opened the notebook again, reading more carefully now. The woman, he still didn't know her name, he realized, wrote about Portland's streets with the detailed observation of an anthropologist. She documented the invisible hierarchies among the homeless, the competition for good panhandling spots, the difference between shelters that treated people like people and shelters that treated them like problems to be processed. But she also wrote about moments of grace, the teenager who'd bought her lunch, the couple who'd given her their umbrella during a rainstorm, the bus driver who'd let her ride without fare when her hands were too cold to count change. And she wrote about Evan. Multiple entries about the man at Riverside Cafe who fed her without judgment, whose son treated her like a person, whose kindness never came with strings or sermons or demands for gratitude. November 18th. Evan asked how I was today. Actually waited for an answer. I said fine. I lied. But it felt good to be asked. November 20th. Danny told me about his mother today. Said she died when he was little. Said his dad gets sad sometimes but tries to hide it. That child sees everything. Wonders where his father learned to be kind while sad. Then realized grief taught him. Loss taught him to notice other people's pain. Evan set the notebook down, vision blurring. He didn't cry much anymore. Had cried himself dry in those first months after Sarah's death. But something about seeing himself through this stranger's eyes opened a wound he'd thought scarred over. He wasn't special. He was just a guy pouring coffee, trying to raise his kid, getting through each day without falling apart completely. The small kindnesses he showed weren't heroic. They were just human decency, the baseline of how people should treat each other. Weren't they? But this woman, dying, alone, testing whether she mattered, had found something meaningful in coffee and toast. Had found hope in a 6-year-old's unfiltered kindness, had documented his ordinary decency like it was extraordinary. Evan didn't know whether to feel honored or heartbroken. He kept reading, moving forward through entries that grew progressively darker. She wrote about pain, physical pain that kept her awake, emotional pain that made waking up difficult. She wrote about doctors who delivered terminal diagnoses with clinical efficiency. She wrote about calling old friends, old colleagues, people who'd once filled her life, only to find they'd moved on. Their numbers changed. Their interest in her expired. She wrote about money, though not in the way Evan had expected, not lamenting its absence, but questioning its meaning. November 25th. I could end this tomorrow. One phone call and I'd have everything back, the house, the staff, the comfort, the treatment. But I'd also have the lie, the performance. The question would remain unanswered. Do I matter because of who I am, or only because of what I have? What did that mean? She could get money but chose not to? Evan flipped forward, searching for clarity, but the next dozen pages were missing, torn out carefully, deliberately. The entries resumed in early December, more fragmented now. December 3rd, weaker today. Hard to walk far. The cafe is close. I can make it to the cafe. December 5th. Evan noticed I was shaking worse, brought me water without asking. Small things matter more now. Every kindness feels amplified. Every cruelty cuts deeper. The final entry was from yesterday. December 9th. Danny asked if I'd like to draw with him. When was the last time anyone invited me to just exist beside them? Not to serve a purpose, not to fulfill an obligation, just to be. I drew a bird. He drew a dinosaur. We showed each other our pictures. I haven't felt that scene in years. Tomorrow, I'll tell Evan thank you. Really tell him. Make sure he knows. But she hadn't told him. She'd left the notebook instead. Evan sat at the kitchen table until midnight, rereading passages, trying to understand. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and he stumbled to bed, the notebook tucked carefully in his backpack for safekeeping. The next morning, he arrived at the cafe early, anticipation humming beneath his skin. 7:30 came and went. No old woman. 8 a.m. passed, then 9. By 10, Evan admitted what he'd known since opening the door. She wasn't coming. Days blurred together. Evan continued his routine, but now the corner booth sat empty, a gap in the cafe's ecosystem that others began to notice. "Where's your homeless friend?" Marcus asked on the third day. "Don't know," Evan said, and didn't elaborate. He couldn't explain the hollow feeling in his chest, the worry that gnawed at him during quiet moments. She was a stranger, someone he'd spoken to perhaps a dozen times, whose name he didn't know. It shouldn't matter this much, but it did. On the fourth day, he convinced his boss to let him leave early, then spent hours walking Portland streets, checking shelters, asking other homeless people if they'd seen a woman matching her description. Nothing. She'd vanished as completely as morning fog. By the end of the first week, Evan had called every hospital in the county, asking about Jane Doe's matching her description. Privacy laws prevented them from telling him much, but the answer was always the same. No one fitting that profile had been admitted. "Why do you care so much?" Danny asked one evening, watching his father pace their small apartment. Evan stopped, the question catching him off guard. Why did he care? He tried to articulate it, fumbling for words. "Because kindness should matter," he finally said. "Because people should matter. And I'm worried that maybe she needed more help than coffee and toast." Danny considered this with the seriousness of childhood. "You did what you could," he said, wisdom beyond his years. "Sometimes that's all there is." Evan pulled his son into a hug, holding tight against the uncertainty. Kids understood things adults forgot, that you couldn't save everyone, that good intentions didn't guarantee good outcomes, that trying still mattered even when you failed. The second week arrived. Evan stopped actively searching, but couldn't stop hoping. Every time the door chimed at 7:30, he looked up expecting to see her. Every evening, he checked the notebook, as if new entries might magically appear. They didn't. On Monday of the third week, Evan was wiping down the counter when the cafe door opened. He glanced up automatically, registered expensive suits and polished shoes, and returned his attention to the coffee machine. Probably downtown lawyers grabbing a quick cup before court. "Evan Carter?" He turned. 4 people stood at the counter, 2 men, 2 women, all dressed in outfits that cost more than Evan's monthly rent. Behind them, visible through the window, a black town car idled at the curb. "That's me," Evan said slowly, suddenly aware of his stained apron and the coffee grounds under his fingernails. "We need to speak with you," the older man said, pulling out a business card. "Privately, if possible." Evan glanced at the card. Robert Harrison, Harrison and Shaw Legal Group. His stomach dropped. Lawyers. Official lawyers who traveled in groups with expensive cars. This was either very bad or very, very bad. "What's this about?" he asked, not taking the card. "Eleanor Hale," the woman beside Harrison said gently. "We understand you knew her." Eleanor. The old woman had a name. "I knew someone," Evan said carefully. "But I don't know anyone named Eleanor." The 4 lawyers exchanged glances. "Perhaps we should sit down," Harrison said, and it wasn't really a question. Evan's boss was in his back office, absorbed in inventory. The cafe was between rushes, nearly empty. Evan led the lawyers to a corner booth, not her booth, he couldn't bear that, and sat across from them, heart hammering against his ribs. "Mr. Carter," Harrison began, folding his hands on the table, "how well did you know the woman who sat in that booth every morning?" He nodded toward the empty corner table. "Not well," Evan admitted. "She came in for coffee. I gave her breakfast sometimes. We barely talked." "But you were kind to her." "I gave her food. That's not—" Evan struggled for words. "That's just basic decency." "Did she ever mention her circumstances to you? Her family? Her resources?" "No." Evan's defensiveness was rising. "She barely spoke. I didn't ask questions. What is this about? Is she okay?" The second woman, younger, with kind eyes, leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, Eleanor Hale passed away 8 days ago." The words hit like physical blows. 8 days. She'd been dead for 8 days, and he'd been wandering the streets looking for her, calling hospitals, hoping— "How?" he whispered. "Pancreatic cancer," the kind-eyed woman said softly. She'd been in hospice care for the final week. It was peaceful. Hospice. Final week. The timeline clicked into place. She'd disappeared from the cafe, entered hospice, died surrounded by... Was she alone? Evan asked, the question torn from somewhere deep. No, Harrison said firmly. Her medical team was with her. She wasn't in pain at the end. But that wasn't what Evan had asked. He'd asked if she was alone. Medical teams weren't family. They weren't friends. They were professionals doing jobs, however compassionate. Why are you here? Evan asked, looking between the four lawyers. Why are you telling me this? Harrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope. Because Eleanor left specific instructions. She wanted you to know what happened to her, and she left you something. Evan stared at the envelope like it might bite. I don't understand. I barely knew her. I just gave her coffee. You gave her more than that, the kind-eyed woman said. You gave her dignity when she had nothing. You saw her when she'd made herself invisible. That mattered to Eleanor, mattered more than you can possibly know. She slid the envelope across the table. Evan didn't touch it. Who was she? He asked instead. Really? The lawyers exchanged glances again, some silent communication passing between them. Eleanor Hale, Harrison said carefully, was the founder and primary shareholder of Hale Industries. Before her illness, before her experiment, she was worth approximately $900 million. The cafe tilted. Evan gripped the table edge, certain he'd misheard. 900 million? Yes. And she was sitting in my cafe pretending to be homeless? She wasn't pretending, the kind-eyed woman said gently. She gave everything away. The house, the cars, the staff. She liquidated her accessible assets and donated them to various charities. She kept only what she could carry and set out to discover something. Discover what? Whether she mattered, Harrison said quietly. Eleanor spent her entire life being valued for her wealth, her company, her influence, her ability to write checks. That's what people saw. She wanted to know if there was anything beneath that worth valuing, if she, Eleanor Hale the person, had any intrinsic worth. Evan thought of the notebook, the careful documentation of every kindness and cruelty. A social experiment conducted by a dying billionaire who'd given away her fortune to see if anyone would care about her without it. He didn't have words. That's incredibly sad. Yes, the kind-eyed woman agreed. It was. But Mr. Carter, you gave her a different answer than the one she'd been finding. Most people ignored her or dismissed her. You fed her. You let your son talk to her. You treated her like a person who mattered. Because she was a person who mattered, Evan said, bewildered that this needed saying. Money doesn't... That's not what makes someone worthy of basic kindness. No, Harrison said, something like approval in his voice. It's not. Eleanor knew that intellectually, but she'd never tested it practically, until she got sick and realized she was running out of time. He tapped the envelope. Please, Mr. Carter, read the letter. Evan's hand shook as he picked up the envelope. It was heavier than he'd expected, thick with contents he couldn't identify. He opened it carefully, pulling out several documents and a handwritten letter on heavy paper. The letter was dated the day before she'd disappeared from the cafe. Dear Evan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye properly, but I didn't trust myself to find the words. Writing has always been easier for me than speaking. You'd understand that if you'd read my notebook. I left it deliberately. I hope you found it. I hope you read it and understood what you gave me. By now, my lawyers have told you who I was, what I was worth. It must seem strange, perhaps even offensive, that someone with my resources would play-act poverty while real people struggle. I understand that criticism. I accept it. But I need you to understand. I wasn't playing. When I walked into your cafe that first morning, I had divested myself of everything that made me Eleanor Hale, industry titan. I had only what any other homeless person has: uncertainty, vulnerability, and the hope that strangers might be kind. You were kind, Evan, not because you knew who I was, not because you expected reward or recognition. You were kind because that's who you are, a man who's known loss, who understands struggle, who sees people rather than circumstances. Your son told me about his mother, about how you care for him alone now, how you work hard, how you sometimes cry when you think he's sleeping, but you're really just tired. That child sees everything. He sees your strength and your sadness, and he's learning from both. You're teaching him that kindness matters even when it costs you, that dignity is something you give others regardless of whether they can repay you, that being human means helping other humans. These are lessons I never learned until it was too late. My entire life was transactions, money for loyalty, influence for service, wealth for proximity. I thought I had friends. I thought I had family. But when I gave away my fortune and walked among the world as just Eleanor, just a sick old woman with nothing to offer, I discovered that everything I'd built was conditional, except what I found with you. Coffee and toast aren't conditional. Letting your child draw pictures with a stranger isn't transactional. Asking how someone is doing and actually listening for the answer isn't a business strategy. It's just goodness, pure, uncomplicated goodness. I'm leaving you something, Evan. Not because you earned it. Kindness can't be earned, it's simply given or withheld, but because you deserve to see what happens when goodness is recognized. My lawyers will explain the details, but know this. I'm trusting you to do with this gift what you did with coffee and toast. See the need. Meet it without judgment. Make people feel seen. Thank you for the warmth of that corner booth. Thank you for treating me like I mattered. Thank you for letting Danny share his joy with someone who'd forgotten what joy looked like. You saved my life, Evan Carter. Not from death, that was always coming, but from dying without knowing that I'd mattered to someone as myself, not as my bank account. With gratitude and affection, Eleanor Evan finished reading, tears streaming down his face in the middle of the cafe, surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits and customers pretending not to stare. I don't understand, he managed. What did she leave me? Harrison reached into the envelope and withdrew a check, sliding it across the table. Evan looked down at a string of numbers that didn't make sense, couldn't make sense, because people like him didn't receive checks with that many zeros. $1 million. Made out to Evan Carter. Signed by Eleanor Hale's estate executor. This isn't... His voice cracked. This can't be real. It's very real, Harrison assured him. Eleanor was quite specific in her will. She left substantial donations to various charities, modest bequests to her staff, and this to you, with instructions. Instructions? The kind-eyed woman withdrew another document. Eleanor requested that you use this money to see the need and meet it. She didn't want to dictate how, but she hoped you'd apply the same principles that guided you when you fed her. She believed you'd know what to do. Evan stared at the check, at the letter, at the lawyers who'd invaded his ordinary morning with impossible news. His mind couldn't process it. $1 million. Eleanor Hale, dead, testing people, mattered. The cafe door chimed. Marcus walked in, calling out his usual greeting, then stopped when he saw the tableau. Evan crying, lawyers surrounding him, official documents spread across the table. Everything okay? Marcus asked, concerned. Evan looked up at his regular customer, at the cafe where he'd worked for 3 years, at the corner booth that would forever be empty now, at the check that could change everything, at the weight of responsibility and trust that came with being seen by someone who'd been invisible. I don't know, he said honestly. I really don't know. But even as he spoke, even through the shock and grief and overwhelming uncertainty, something was crystallizing in his mind. Eleanor had tested people to see if she mattered. She'd documented kindness like a scientist recording data. She'd given away everything to discover if anything remained without the money. And in that corner booth, over coffee and toast, she'd found her answer. Now it was Evan's turn to find his. The lawyers left after 2 hours of explanation, paperwork, and assurances that everything was legitimate, legal, and irreversible. Evan sat alone in the booth long after they'd gone, the check still on the table before him, Eleanor's letter clutched in his trembling hands. Marcus approached cautiously, sliding into the seat across from him. You going to tell me what that was about? Or do I have to guess? His friend asked gently. Evan looked up, realized the cafe had emptied during the meeting, that his boss must have handled the counter while he was occupied. How long had he been sitting here? The woman, he said hoarsely. The one who used to sit in the corner. She died. I'm sorry, man. I know she mattered to you. She was a billionaire, Marcus. The words felt absurd leaving his mouth. She gave away everything to see if people would treat her like a human being without the money. And I passed her test without knowing I was being tested. Marcus's eyes widened. He glanced at the check, still face up on the table, and let out a low whistle. That's $1 million, Evan finished. She left me $1 million because I gave her toast. That's not why, Marcus said firmly. You gave her dignity. There's a difference. Evan's laugh came out broken. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to be someone who has this kind of money. Yesterday I was worried about Danny's shoes. Today I could buy him 100 pairs of shoes. It doesn't feel real. What are you going to do? The question hung in the air between them. Evan looked around the cafe, at the cracked vinyl, the flickering lights, the coffee machine that broke down twice a week. At the life he'd built from the wreckage of Sarah's death, modest and difficult but his own. I don't know, he admitted. Eleanor left instructions. She said to see the need and meet it. But there's so much need, Marcus. Where do I even start? His friend considered this, then said quietly, maybe you start where she started, with coffee and toast. The words resonated in Evan's chest. He thought of Eleanor's notebook, the careful documentation of small kindnesses that had meant everything to someone who had nothing. He thought of her letter, the trust she'd placed in him to recognize goodness and amplify it. I need to go home, he said abruptly, standing. I need to think. Danny doesn't even know yet. God, how do I explain this to a 6-year-old? The truth, Marcus said. You tell him the truth, that kindness matters, that his father's goodness changed someone's life. That's a lesson worth learning young. Evan nodded, gathering the documents with shaking hands. The check went into his wallet, though it felt dangerous carrying something so valuable. The letter he folded carefully and placed in his shirt pocket, over his heart. He drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets of his neighborhood. The apartment building looked different somehow, smaller, more temporary. Yesterday it had been home. Today it felt like a way station, a place he was already leaving even though he hadn't moved. Danny was at the neighbor's apartment, Mrs. Chen watching him as she did most afternoons when Evan worked late. He picked up his son, deflecting questions about his pale face and distracted manner, and carried the boy upstairs to their 2-bedroom unit that suddenly felt impossibly cramped. Dad, you're acting weird, Danny observed as Evan set him down in their tiny living room. I have something to tell you, buddy. Something important. Evan sat on their threadbare couch, pulling Danny close. Remember the lady from the cafe? The one who used to sit in the corner? The sad one who liked my dinosaur drawing? Yeah, her name was Eleanor. She passed away, Danny. His son's face crumpled with the immediate empathy of childhood. Like Mom? Like Mom, Evan confirmed, throat tight. She was very sick, but before she died, she did something really special. She left us some money. How much money? Evan almost laughed at the directness of the question. A lot. Enough that we don't have to worry anymore. Enough that you can have new shoes when you need them, and I can take you to the doctor when you're sick without being scared about the bills. Danny processed this solemnly. Was she rich? Very rich, but she gave most of it away because she wanted to know if people would still be nice to her without the money. Were you nice to her? I tried to be. Then you passed the test, Danny said with perfect 6-year-old logic. That's good. I'm glad we were nice. She was lonely. The simple assessment gutted Evan. His son had understood in moments what it had taken him hours to process. That Eleanor's wealth was irrelevant to her fundamental isolation, that her experiment was born from profound loneliness, that kindness was its own reward regardless of what came after. Yeah, buddy, he managed. She was very lonely, but I think we helped make her a little less lonely at the end. Danny hugged him fiercely, his small body warm and solid against Evan's chest. They stayed like that for a long time, father and son holding each other in their small apartment, while the weight of impossible fortune settled around them. That night, after Danny was asleep, Evan sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's letter and a legal pad, trying to think. The lawyers had explained the practicalities. The check would clear. The money was his free and clear. No taxes owed thanks to how Eleanor had structured the bequest. He could cash it tomorrow if he wanted. could walk into the bank and walk out with access to wealth he'd never imagined having. But then what? His first instinct was practical, almost embarrassingly mundane. Pay off debt. Replace Danny's clothes. Fix the car that had been making ominous noises for 3 months. Stock the pantry with more than ramen and canned soup. These were small things, poverty-shaped dreams that didn't require $1 million to achieve. But Eleanor hadn't left him money for new shoes and car repairs, had she? She'd left instructions. See the need and meet it. Evan thought about his neighborhood, the struggling families he passed every day, the single mothers working double shifts, the elderly folks choosing between medication and food, the kids wearing coats too thin for Portland winters. The need was everywhere once you started looking, vast and overwhelming in its scope. He couldn't help everyone, but maybe he could help someone. The idea came slowly, taking shape over hours of restless thinking. Eleanor had found meaning in his cafe, in the corner booth where someone had seen her. What if he could create more spaces like that? Places where people were seen, fed, treated with dignity regardless of what they could pay. By dawn, Evan had the skeleton of a plan. It terrified him, the audacity of it, the risk, the 1,000 ways it could fail. But it also felt right in a way nothing had felt right since Sarah's death. He called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. His boss, predictably, was furious. "You can't just not show up, Carter. We've got the morning rush. I quit," Evan heard himself say. The words came out steady, certain. "I'm giving you my 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. I'll work them if you need me to, but after that, I'm done." The silence on the other end was stunned. Then, "You're quitting? After 3 years? Where the hell are you going to find another job?" "I'm not looking for another job," Evan said. "I'm starting something new." He hung up before his boss could respond, adrenaline singing through his veins. He'd just quit. He'd actually quit. The security of steady employment, meager as it was, gone with a single phone call. But he had $1 million in the bank. He had Eleanor's trust and instructions. He had a plan taking shape in his mind, rough and ambitious, and probably crazy. He had hope, for the first time in years. The next week blurred with activity. Evan deposited the check, watching the teller's eyes widen at the amount. He opened a separate account for Eleanor's money, refusing to let it mix with his own meager funds. This wasn't his money. It was a trust, a responsibility, a mission. He hired a lawyer, not the expensive downtown type who delivered Eleanor's bequest, but a small practice attorney who specialized in nonprofits and community organizations. Together they began the paperwork to establish the Eleanor Hale Foundation, dedicated to providing food, dignity, and support to Portland's invisible populations. "What exactly do you want to do?" the lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, asked during their first meeting. Evan spread out his notes, pages of ideas scribbled late at night, dreams that had seemed impossible yesterday but felt achievable today. "I want to open a cafe," he said. "Like the one where I worked, but different. A place where anyone can come in and get a meal, pay what they can afford, even if that's nothing. No questions asked, no judgment passed. But more than that." He leaned forward, words coming faster as the vision clarified. "I want to hire people who've been where Eleanor was. People experiencing homelessness, people rebuilding after addiction, people who can't get hired anywhere else because they don't have an address or their background check shows mistakes from their past. I want to create jobs that come with dignity, training, and the assumption of human worth." Patricia was taking notes, nodding. "That's ambitious. And expensive." "I have $1 million, Evan said. "How far will that take me?" "Farther than you'd think if you're smart about it. Start small, prove the concept, build from there. Don't try to save the world in year 1. "Eleanor didn't ask me to save the world," Evan replied quietly. "She asked me to see the need and meet it. I'm just trying to do that on a bigger scale than coffee and toast." They worked together over the following weeks, establishing the foundation's structure, filing paperwork with the state, navigating the bureaucratic maze of nonprofit status. Patricia worked for a fraction of her normal rate, touched by the story and eager to see the vision realized. Evan searched for a location, somewhere affordable enough to get started, but visible enough to matter. He walked Portland's streets the way Eleanor must have walked them, seeing the city through new eyes. The neighborhoods with the most need were often the ones with the least commercial activity. Food deserts where grocery stores had closed and fast food chains dominated. He found the space on a gray January afternoon, 3 weeks after Eleanor's lawyers had walked into his life. It was a former diner in the Lentz neighborhood, closed for 6 months after the owner retired. The building was tired but structurally sound, with good bones beneath the grime and neglect. The rent was manageable, just barely. The location was perfect, surrounded by apartment complexes where working families struggled, near a park where homeless folks congregated, accessible by public transit. It needed work, needed investment, needed someone to believe it could be more than abandoned real estate. Evan stood in the empty dining room, imagining it transformed. Tables where people could sit without fear of being run off. A kitchen producing simple, nutritious food. A staff of people who'd been dismissed and discarded by society, given a second chance to matter. "I'll take it," he told the landlord. The man looked at him skeptically. This 28-year-old in secondhand clothes who claimed he could afford the rent, who wanted to open a cafe with a bizarre business model that sounded more like charity than commerce. "You got first and last month's rent plus deposit?" the landlord asked. Evan wrote a check from the foundation account, the numbers still feeling surreal. "I've got it," he said. The work began immediately. Evan couldn't afford to hire a full renovation crew, so he did much of it himself, scrubbing floors, painting walls, repairing equipment. Marcus showed up on weekends to help, bringing friends from the shipyard who knew their way around tools and weren't afraid of hard work. Danny spent Saturdays at the cafe in progress, sweeping floors and passing his father nails, asking endless questions about what everything would look like when finished. "Will poor people eat here?" he asked one afternoon, the blunt curiosity of childhood at work. "Everyone will eat here," Evan corrected gently. "People who have money and people who don't. The difference is that we won't let anyone go hungry just because they can't pay." "Like you did with Eleanor." "Exactly like that." Word spread through the neighborhood about the cafe being renovated, speculation running wild about what it would become. Evan fielded questions from curious neighbors, explaining his vision to skeptical faces that had seen too many promises break. "A pay-what-you-can cafe?" one woman repeated doubtfully. "That's just going to attract freeloaders." "Maybe," Evan acknowledged. "Or maybe it'll attract people who are hungry. Either way, they get fed. You'll go broke in 3 months, Maybe," he said again. "But I'm going to try anyway." He began interviewing potential staff in February, spreading word through shelters and community organizations that he was hiring. The applicants came tentatively, disbelieving, people accustomed to rejection who'd been turned away from so many jobs they'd stopped hoping. Michael was first. 34, living in his car for 8 months after a layoff and divorce had destroyed his stability. He'd been an accountant once, managed budgets and payroll for a mid-sized firm. Now he couldn't get hired at fast food chains because he had no permanent address. "Why should I hire you?" Evan asked during the interview, not because he wanted to intimidate, but because he needed to understand. Michael met his eyes directly. "Because I know what it's like to be invisible. I know what it's like when people look through you instead of at you. If you're serious about this place being different, you need people who understand that difference isn't theoretical, it's survival." "You're hired," Evan said. "Can you start next week?" Michael's composure cracked. "You're serious, just like that?" "Just like that. Eleanor taught me that worth isn't measured by circumstances. You're worth the chance. Let's see what you can do with it." Teresa came next. 52, 6 months out of prison after serving time for drug possession, unable to find work because of her record. She'd been clean for 2 years, working with a re-entry program, desperate for the opportunity to prove she was more than her worst mistake. "I can cook," she told Evan. "Worked in kitchen jobs before everything. I'm not asking for charity, I'm asking for a shot." "The cafe opens in 3 weeks," Evan said. "I need someone who can run the kitchen, develop a menu that's simple but good, train others. Can you do that?" Teresa stared at him. "You'd trust me with that?" "Eleanor trusted me with $1 million because I gave her toast. I'm pretty sure I can trust you with a kitchen." Her eyes filled with tears. "I won't let you down." "I know," Evan said, and meant it. The staff came together slowly, 7 people by opening day, each carrying stories of hardship, each hungry for the chance to matter. Evan trained them not just in cafe operations, but in the philosophy Eleanor had taught him. Everyone deserves dignity. Kindness costs nothing. Being seen is sometimes worth more than being fed. They painted a sign together during the final week of preparation. Simple, direct. Eleanor's place. Everyone welcome. Who was Eleanor? Teresa asked, roller in hand. Evan told them the story. All of it. The corner booth, the coffee and toast, the notebook. The test he'd passed without knowing he was being tested. His staff listened with the rapt attention of people who understood exactly what it meant to be invisible, to wonder if anyone would notice if you disappeared. She saw the best in me when I couldn't see it in myself, Evan finished. I'm hoping we can do that for other people. See them when the world looks away. Feed them when they're hungry. Treat them like they matter, because they do. Michael spoke first, voice rough with emotion. That's what you did for us. Saw us. Hired us when nobody else would. Because you're capable, Evan said simply. Because worth isn't determined by circumstances. Because Eleanor proved that everyone deserves the chance to be seen as fully human. They opened on a cold morning in early March, just over 2 months after the lawyers had walked into Evan's life. The cafe was modest. 16 tables, a small kitchen, a counter where people could order and pay what they could afford. A sign on the wall explained the system, suggested prices for those who could pay, no minimum for those who couldn't, donations welcome for those who wanted to pay it forward. The first customer was a homeless man Evan recognized from the neighborhood, someone who'd watched the renovation with wary hope. Is it true? He asked, standing hesitant in the doorway. About the paying what you can? It's true, Evan confirmed. What would you like? Coffee, the man said. And maybe eggs? If that's okay? More than okay. Have a seat. I'll bring it out. The man pulled coins from his pocket, counting carefully. 83 cents. This is what I have, he said, shame coloring his voice. Evan accepted the coins with the same seriousness he'd accept a $100 bill. Thank you. Your breakfast will be right out. He brought coffee and eggs and toast to the table, setting them down the way he'd set down meals for Eleanor, without ceremony, without judgment, just simple service. This place, the man said, looking around at the clean tables and warm lights. It's named for someone? A friend, Evan said. Someone who taught me that everyone deserves to be seen. The man nodded slowly, understanding passing between them, the recognition of shared humanity that transcends circumstance. More customers followed throughout that first day. Some paid full price, some paid partial, some paid nothing at all. Each was treated exactly the same, welcomed, fed, seen. The staff moved through their roles with the careful pride of people who'd been given something precious: purpose, employment, the chance to serve others who'd suffered as they'd suffered. By closing time, they'd served 43 meals and collected enough in payments and donations to cover the day's operating costs. Barely breaking even, but breaking even nonetheless. We did it, Teresa said, exhausted but glowing. We actually did it. First day, Michael cautioned. Let's see if we can sustain it. But Evan was watching Danny, who'd spent the afternoon doing homework in the corner booth, Eleanor's booth, he'd always think of it, and occasionally helping bus tables. His son looked up, caught his father's eye, and smiled with pure, uncomplicated joy. Sustain it or not, they'd done something Eleanor would have recognized. They'd seen the need. They'd met it. They'd treated strangers like human beings deserving of warmth and food and dignity. For today, that was enough. The weeks that followed were harder than Evan had anticipated. Running a pay-what-you-can cafe turned out to be vastly different from working in one. The finances were precarious. Some days they collected more than they spent. Other days they hemorrhaged money feeding people who paid nothing at all. Evan learned to balance compassion with sustainability, idealism with practical realities. Word spread quickly through Portland's homeless community. Eleanor's place became known as the cafe where you wouldn't be run off, where kindness was policy rather than exception. They began seeing regular faces, people who came daily, who paid what they could when they could, who lingered in the warmth and safety of a space designed for their dignity. But not everyone approved. Complaints came from neighboring businesses about the clientele, about people loitering outside, about the neighborhood changing in ways that made some uncomfortable. "You're attracting the wrong element," one shop owner told Evan bluntly. "This used to be a decent area." "It still is," Evan replied evenly. "Decent areas don't exclude people because they're poor." "You're naive if you think this ends well. You're enabling them." The criticism stung because part of Evan worried it might be true. Was he helping people or just making it easier for them to avoid addressing their underlying problems? Eleanor had tested whether she mattered without money. Was he inadvertently testing whether charity could substitute for systemic change? He brought his doubts to Patricia during one of their regular check-ins. "Am I doing this right?" he asked, spreading the cafe's financial statements across her desk. "We're barely staying afloat. I'm spending Eleanor's money faster than I planned. What if I'm wasting her gift?" Patricia looked at him over her reading glasses, expression patient. "Evan, Eleanor didn't leave you money because she wanted a guaranteed return on investment. She left it because you saw her. You're doing the same for others. That's not waste. That's exactly what she asked you to do. But if the cafe fails, then it fails. And you'll have fed hundreds of people in the process. You'll have employed people who couldn't get hired anywhere else. You'll have created a space where being human was enough. How is any of that failure?" Her words steadied him, reminded him that success couldn't be measured only in financial sustainability. But Evan also knew that good intentions didn't keep lights on or staff paid. He needed to find a way to make the model work long-term. The solution came from an unexpected source. A local journalist heard about Eleanor's place and wanted to write a story. Evan initially refused. Publicity felt wrong somehow, like exploiting Eleanor's death for attention. But Michael convinced him otherwise. "People need to know places like this exist," his accountant-turned-manager argued. "Not for us, but for the people who don't know where to go when they're hungry, and for the people who want to help but don't know how." The article ran in mid-April, a thoughtful piece about the cafe, Eleanor's experiment, and Evan's attempt to honor her legacy. It went viral, locally, then regionally, then nationally. Donations poured in, $10 here, $100 there, occasionally thousands from people moved by the story of a billionaire who'd tested human kindness and a cafe worker who'd passed. The money helped, but more valuable were the volunteers. People showed up wanting to help. Retired teachers offering to tutor kids who came with parents, nurses providing free health screenings, social workers connecting guests with services. Eleanor's place became more than a cafe. It became a community hub, a place where people could access resources while being treated as neighbors rather than problems. Danny's 7th birthday fell in late April. Evan asked what he wanted for his party. "Can we have it at Eleanor's place?" his son asked. "And can I invite the people who eat there?" Evan's throat tightened. "Yeah, buddy, we can do that." They celebrated on a Sunday afternoon. The cafe closed to regular service but filled with guests. The homeless men who'd become regulars, the single mothers who brought their kids for affordable meals, the elderly folks who came as much for company as food. Danny moved among them with unself-conscious joy, sharing cake and showing off his presence with democratic enthusiasm. Watching his son laugh with a formerly homeless veteran, Evan felt Eleanor's presence so strongly it was almost physical. This messy, complicated, beautiful gathering of people who mattered to each other, this was what she'd wanted him to see. That communities form when people are treated as human, that dignity creates connection, that kindness multiplies when given freely. "Your boy's got a good heart," Teresa said, appearing at his elbow. "Wonder where he learned that." "From his mother," Evan said automatically, then thinking of Eleanor's letter, "and from someone who taught me that being seen is everything." "We're doing good work here," Teresa said quietly. "I just wanted you to know. I've been clean 2 years, but this job, this place, it's the first time I felt like a whole person again. Not just my mistakes, not just my past, a whole person with something to offer." Evan turned to face her fully. That's exactly what Eleanor wanted, for people to matter beyond their circumstances. Then we're honoring her right. They were, Evan thought, imperfectly, incompletely, but genuinely. The cafe wasn't solving homelessness or ending poverty. Those problems were too vast for coffee and toast to address. But they were seeing people, feeding them, treating them like they mattered. And in Eleanor's economy, in the careful accounting she'd kept in her worn notebook, that was worth everything. That evening, after Danny was asleep and the cafe was closed and the last volunteer had gone home, Evan sat in the corner booth with Eleanor's letter, reading it again by lamplight. "You saved my life," she'd written. "Not from death, that was always coming, but from dying without knowing that I'd mattered to someone as myself, not as my bank account." "I'm trying," Evan whispered to the empty cafe. "I'm trying to save other people the way you said I saved you. I hope I'm doing it right. I hope you'd be proud." No answer came, of course, but in the quiet of Eleanor's place, surrounded by the physical evidence of kindness multiplied, Evan felt something he'd thought lost with Sarah's death. Peace. The settled certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he needed to do. The journey wasn't over. The cafe's future remained uncertain. The problems they were addressing were vast and systemic. But for tonight, in this moment, Evan had done what Eleanor asked. He'd seen the need, he'd met it, and tomorrow he'd do it again. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made Portland's streets shimmer, and with it came challenges Evan hadn't anticipated. The cafe's air conditioning system, ancient when he'd taken over the space, finally gave up entirely on a 100-degree afternoon in July. Repair would cost $8,000. Replacement, $12,000. Evan sat in the sweltering office, reviewing the foundation's accounts with Michael. The viral article had brought a surge of donations, but those had tapered off as public attention moved elsewhere. They were still covering operating costs, still paying staff, still feeding everyone who walked through the door. But there was no cushion, no safety net for emergencies like a dead AC system in the middle of summer. "We could do a fundraiser," Michael suggested, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Reach out to the people who donated before, explain the situation." "That feels like begging," Evan said, though he knew it wasn't. Nonprofits fundraised constantly. That was how they survived. "It's not begging to ask for help doing good work," Michael countered. "We've fed over 2,000 meals in 4 months. We've employed 7 people who couldn't get hired anywhere else. We've created something that matters. People want to support that." Evan knew he was right, but something in him resisted. Eleanor had given him $1 million. The fact that he'd already spent a third of it on renovations, equipment, 4 months of operations, staff salaries, felt like failure somehow. Like he was burning through her trust faster than he was building anything sustainable. "Let me think about it," he said finally. That evening, the cafe stayed open despite the heat, every window and door propped wide to catch any breath of air. The guests who came were grateful for even warm shelter, for cold water and iced tea Evan made by the gallon, for the industrial fans Michael had bought at cost from a friend's warehouse. An elderly woman Evan didn't recognize shuffled in around 6, looking heat-exhausted and dehydrated. She collapsed into the nearest chair and Teresa was there instantly, with ice water and a cold compress. "What's your name, honey?" Teresa asked gently. "Rose," the woman whispered. "I'm sorry, I just needed to sit down." "Nothing to apologize for. You hungry?" Rose shook her head, but Evan saw the lie. He'd learned to recognize hunger over these months, the way people's eyes tracked food, the careful way they swallowed, the shame that accompanied need. "Teresa, can you bring Rose our cold pasta salad and some fruit if we have it?" "I can't pay," Rose said, the familiar shame coloring her voice. "Did you see the sign outside?" Evan pulled up a chair beside her. "Everyone's welcome here, payments optional." "But I don't have anything." "Then you pay what you have, which is nothing. That's fine." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "I used to have a home. I used to have money. My husband died, and the medical bills, I lost everything. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who couldn't afford a meal." Evan took her weathered hand gently. "You're not a kind of person. You're just a person. That's all anyone here is. Just people who need food and kindness." Teresa brought the pasta salad and a bowl of strawberries, setting them down with quiet dignity. Rose ate slowly, savoring every bite, and Evan sat with her in silence, a presence that said, "You're not alone. You're not invisible. You matter." When she finished, Rose looked around the cafe, at the other guests eating and talking, at the staff moving with purpose, at Danny doing homework in the corner booth while occasionally helping bus tables. "What is this place really?" she asked. "I don't understand how it exists." So Evan told her about Eleanor, about the test, about the coffee and toast that had become something larger, about trying to honor a dying woman's wish that people be seen regardless of their circumstances. Rose listened with the intensity of someone hearing their own story reflected back. When Evan finished, she reached into her worn purse and pulled out a $20 bill, creased and soft from handling, probably her last $20 in the world. "For the next person," she said firmly. "Someone who needs it like I needed it today." Evan accepted the money with the same gravity he accepted 83 cents. "Thank you. This will feed someone who's hungry." "That woman, Eleanor," Rose said. "She was testing if people saw her. But you know what? Every day, people like me are taking the same test. We walk around invisible, wondering if anyone notices we're human. You noticed. This place notices." Her words stayed with Evan long after she left, walking steadier with food and water in her system. He thought about all the Eleanors in the world, people testing whether they mattered, whether anyone would see them, whether human connection existed beyond transaction. The cafe was full of them, had always been full of them. That night, Evan made a decision. He posted about the broken AC on the cafe's small social media presence, explaining the situation honestly. Not begging, just presenting the facts. They needed help to keep serving people through the summer heat. Within 24 hours, they'd raised $11,000, enough for a new system with money left over. But more meaningful than the money were the comments. Hundreds of them, from people who'd eaten at Eleanor's place, from people who'd read about it, from people who'd never visited Portland but believed in what the cafe represented. "You fed my mother when she had nothing," one person wrote. "This is the least I can do." "I was homeless for 3 years," another shared. "Places like this saved my life. Here's what I can spare." "Eleanor's experiment proved people can be kind," read a third. "You're proving it every day. Keep going." Michael installed the new AC system himself with help from Marcus, refusing to pay for professional installation when he had the skills to do it. The cafe reopened at full capacity, and the difference was immediate. Guests stayed longer, lingered over meals, used the space as the community hub it was designed to be. But success brought visibility, and visibility brought scrutiny. The city inspector arrived on a Tuesday morning in August, clipboard in hand and suspicion in his eyes. He examined every corner of the cafe, questioning their food handling procedures, their employee certifications, their business model. "You're operating as a restaurant but functioning as a charity," he said, making notes. "That creates regulatory gray areas." "We're a nonprofit cafe," Evan explained, keeping his voice level. "We serve food and accept payment on a pay-what-you-can basis. Everything we do is legal and properly documented. Your clientele is largely homeless population. That creates health and safety concerns." "Our clientele is largely hungry people," Evan corrected, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "Being poor doesn't make someone a health hazard." The inspector's expression hardened. "I'm going to need to see all your permits, your staff certifications, your food sourcing documentation, and I'll be back for a follow-up inspection in 2 weeks." After he left, Teresa found Evan in the office, head in his hands. "He's going to shut us down," Evan said. "He as good as said so." "Then we make sure he can't," Teresa replied firmly. "We get every certification, every permit, every piece of documentation in perfect order. We show him this place is cleaner and safer than half the restaurants in Portland." She was right, but compliance was expensive. Staff certifications cost money. Additional permits cost money. The follow-up inspection would look for any excuse to find violations, and fixing potential violations before they were cited required investment they hadn't budgeted for. Evan looked at the foundation accounts. They'd burned through $500,000 in 6 months. At this rate, Eleanor's gift would be gone in another 6. And then what? Close the cafe? Lay off staff who'd finally found stability? Stop feeding the people who depended on this place? The weight of responsibility was crushing. He'd thought having money would solve problems, but it had only revealed how vast the problems truly were, how inadequate even $1 million was against the systemic failures that created hunger and homelessness in the first place. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted to Teresa. "I'm not a nonprofit director. I'm not a business manager. I'm just a guy who gave someone toast, and somehow that became all of this. He gestured helplessly at the cafe around them. Teresa pulled up a chair, her expression kind but firm. You know what I was before I went to prison? A sous chef at a nice downtown restaurant. I was good at my job, really good. Then I got hooked on pills after a car accident, and everything fell apart. Lost the job, lost my apartment, lost myself for a while. She paused, making sure Evan was listening. When I got out, I applied to 43 restaurants. 43. Every single one rejected me the moment they ran my background check. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was just a criminal, a risk, something to avoid. Then you hired me without hesitation. You gave me a kitchen to run. You trusted me. You deserved that trust. That's my point, Teresa interrupted. You saw what I deserved when nobody else did. You see what people deserve every day, our staff, our guests, everyone who walks through that door. That's not nothing, Evan. That's everything. But if we can't sustain this, then we fought like hell while we could. But I don't think we're done yet. I think we're just getting started. Her conviction steadied him. Evan spent the next 2 weeks in a fury of organization, working with Patricia to ensure every legal requirement was met, every certification current, every procedure documented. The staff trained on enhanced food safety protocols. Michael reorganized the bookkeeping to withstand the closest scrutiny. When the inspector returned, he found a cafe operating at standards that exceeded code requirements. He examined everything, questioned everyone, searched for violations. He found none. This is acceptable, he said finally, the admission grudging. Just acceptable? Michael asked, unable to resist. The inspector's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Fine. It's impressive. I've inspected restaurants that don't maintain these standards. You're doing good work here. After he left, the staff celebrated with the quiet satisfaction of people who'd proven themselves against skepticism. But Evan felt something shift inside him. They'd won this battle, but there would be others. There would always be people who saw the cafe as a problem rather than a solution, who viewed compassion as naive, who believed that helping people enabled them rather than empowering them. He thought of Eleanor, conducting her experiment, documenting every interaction. She'd discovered that kindness was rare, that most people looked through her rather than at her. But she'd also discovered Evan, proof that goodness existed, that some people saw others regardless of circumstance. Maybe that was enough. Maybe he didn't need to save everyone or solve everything. Maybe all he needed to do was keep being the person Eleanor had seen in him, someone who noticed, who cared, who acted on that care. September brought new challenges in the form of Derek Chen, a young man who showed up asking for a job with a resume that was mostly gaps and vague descriptions. Evan interviewed him in the office, noting the nervous energy, the way Derek's eyes darted around, the careful way he answered questions. "Why do you want to work here?" Evan asked. "I need a job," Derek said, "and I heard you hire people other places won't. Why won't other places hire you?" Derek hesitated, then said quietly, "I have a record. Theft. I was 17, stupid, desperate. Did 2 years in juvie. I'm 22 now, and nobody will give me a chance." Evan studied the young man across the desk. Derek reminded him of himself in some ways, that desperate hunger to prove worth, to be seen as more than circumstances. But there was something else too, something harder to define. "If I hire you," Evan said slowly, "I need to trust you. This cafe runs on trust, trusting our guests to pay what they can, trusting our staff to treat everyone with dignity. Can I trust you?" "Yes," Derek said immediately. Then, more honestly, "I want you to be able to. I'm trying to be someone you can trust." The distinction mattered. Evan hired him. Derek started as a dishwasher, the entry position for most new staff. He worked hard, showed up on time, kept his head down. But Evan noticed small things: supplies disappearing from the storage room, cash discrepancies in the register, Derek's nervousness when questioned about either. Michael noticed too. "We might have a problem," he said, showing Evan the inventory logs. "We're missing about $200 worth of food over the past 2 weeks, and the register was short $40 yesterday." Evan's heart sank. He'd wanted to believe in Derek, wanted to give him the same chance he'd given everyone else. But trust was a two-way street. and theft violated the fundamental principle the cafe was built on. He found Derek during a break, smoking behind the building. "We need to talk," Evan said. Derek's face went carefully blank. "About what?" "About the missing supplies, about the register discrepancies, about whether you're the person you said you wanted to be." For a long moment, Derek said nothing, then quietly, "Are you firing me?" "I'm giving you a chance to tell me the truth." Derek dropped his cigarette, grinding it under his heel. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I've been taking food," he admitted. "Not to sell, to eat. I'm staying in a shelter, and they only serve breakfast. I get so hungry by dinner, and I thought just a little wouldn't matter, just enough to get through the day." "And the money?" "That was an accident. I gave someone wrong change and pocketed the difference without thinking. Old habits from before. I put it back the next day, I swear." Evan felt the situation's complexities settle over him. Derek had stolen, yes, but he'd stolen food because he was hungry, working full-time but still homeless, still struggling. The register money he'd returned recognized his mistake and corrected it. This was the gray area Eleanor's experiment had never addressed. What happened when people failed, when they made mistakes, when they were trying but not quite succeeding? "Here's what's going to happen," Evan said finally. "You're going to eat here. Every shift, you get a free meal. That's not a privilege. That's part of working here. We feed people. That includes our staff." Derek stared at him. "You're not firing me?" "I'm not firing you, but I'm also not ignoring what happened. You violated trust. That has to be rebuilt. You'll work with Michael directly for the next month. He'll oversee your register work, your inventory access, everything. You prove yourself trustworthy, we move forward. You mess up again, we reevaluate. Fair?" "More than fair," Derek whispered. "Thank you. I won't. I'll prove you right. I promise." "Don't prove me right," Evan said. "Prove yourself right. Be the person you want to be." The conversation with Derek stayed with Evan as autumn settled over Portland. He thought about Eleanor's test, about how she'd documented kindness and cruelty in her notebook. But life wasn't that simple, was it? People weren't purely kind or cruel. They were complicated, struggling, making mistakes, and trying to do better. Derek proved himself over the following weeks. He showed up early, worked late, treated every task with careful attention. He saved his paychecks, found a room to rent, started building a life beyond survival. And he became the cafe's most vocal advocate among Portland's homeless population, bringing people in who needed food and dignity. "This place saved me," he told Evan one evening while closing. "Not just the job. The way you handled things when I messed up. Most people would have called the cops or just fired me. You gave me a chance to be better." "Eleanor gave me the same chance," Evan replied. "She saw who I could be, not just who I was. I'm just passing that forward." By October, the cafe had served over 5,000 meals. The foundation had $300 left in the bank. Evan lay awake at night doing math that never quite worked, trying to figure out how to keep the doors open past November. Then Rose returned. She walked in on a gray Tuesday afternoon, but she looked different, healthier, steadier, dressed in clean clothes that fit properly. She approached the counter where Evan was working and set down an envelope. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for the meal back in July, for treating me like I mattered when I thought I didn't anymore." "You're doing better," Evan observed, genuinely pleased. "Much better. That day I came in here, I was ready to give up. I'd been on the streets for 3 months, and I couldn't see a way forward. But you fed me. You sat with me. You made me feel human again. That gave me the strength to go to a shelter, to accept help, to start rebuilding." She pushed the envelope across the counter. "I got a job. Nothing fancy, but it's steady. I'm renting a room. I'm okay now. And I wanted to pay you back. Not for the meal, but for the hope." Evan opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $500. "Rose, this is too much." "It's exactly enough," she interrupted firmly. "I told you I'd pay for the next person. Consider this payment for a lot of next persons." He accepted the check because refusing would have diminished her gift, her agency, her ability to give back. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank Eleanor," Rose replied. "She started this. You're just keeping it going." But Rose wasn't the only one. Over the following weeks, others returned. People who'd eaten at the cafe when they had nothing, who'd since found stability, who wanted to contribute. $20 here, 50 there, occasionally hundreds. Not everyone could give, but those who could did so with the fierce pride of people repaying debts of dignity. Danny noticed the pattern. "Dad," he said one evening, "the people you helped are helping back." "Yeah, buddy, they are." Is that what Eleanor wanted? For kindness to go in a circle? Evan considered his son's question. Eleanor had wanted to know if she mattered, if people would see her, but maybe she'd also understood something deeper, that kindness created connection, and connection created community, and community sustained itself through mutual care. "I think so," Evan said. "I think she wanted to prove that when you treat people with dignity, they remember, and when they can, they pass it forward." The foundation's bank account stabilized, not flush, but sustainable. The cafe found its rhythm, some guests paying full price, some paying partial, some paying nothing, some returning months later to pay back meals they'd received when desperate. The math didn't always work on a daily basis, but over time it balanced. Eleanor's place became woven into the neighborhood's fabric. The staff expanded to 10, then 12. Every person hired was someone other employers had rejected, someone who needed not just a job, but a chance to matter. Some worked out brilliantly. Some struggled and needed support. A few didn't make it, the weight of their challenges too heavy for employment alone to address. Evan learned to accept that he couldn't save everyone. But he could create a space where everyone was seen, where dignity was the baseline, where kindness was the operating principle. On a cold November evening, nearly a year after Eleanor's death, Evan sat in the corner booth after closing, Danny asleep with his head on the table, exhausted from helping all afternoon. The cafe was quiet, clean, ready for tomorrow. Through the windows, he could see Portland's streets, the same streets Eleanor had walked, documenting humanity's response to her invisible presence. He pulled out her letter, worn now from repeated readings, and traced the words with his finger. "You saved my life, Evan Carter. Not from death. That was always coming. But from dying without knowing that I'd mattered to someone as myself, not as my bank account." "We're still here," he whispered to her memory. "Still feeding people. Still seeing them. Still trying to honor what you taught me." Danny stirred, lifting his head sleepily. "Who are you talking to, Dad?" "Just Eleanor, telling her we're doing okay." His son nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I think she knows. I think she's watching." Evan gathered his sleeping boy into his arms, carrying him out to the car. Behind them, Eleanor's place sat dark and quiet, waiting for tomorrow's hungry people, tomorrow's chances to see and be seen, tomorrow's opportunities to prove that kindness, simple, ordinary kindness, could change everything. Winter arrived with an intensity that caught Portland off guard, temperatures dropping below freezing for days at a time. The cafe became more than a place to eat. It became refuge, shelter, somewhere people could escape the brutal cold without being asked to leave. Evan started opening an hour earlier and closing an hour later, the heating bills climbing steadily even as guest numbers tripled. Michael cornered him in the office one morning in mid-December, concern etched across his face. "We can't sustain this," he said, spreading utility bills across the desk. "Heat, electricity, water. We're burning through resources faster than donations are coming in. If we keep the extended hours through January, we'll be in serious trouble by February." Evan stared at the numbers, feeling the familiar weight of impossible choices. Cut hours and turn away people who'd freeze on the streets? Or keep the doors open and risk the foundation going broke? "What if we don't cut hours?" he said slowly. "But we ask for help. Set up warming stations, partner with other organizations, spread the burden? That takes time we don't have. It's already December 15th. Then we make the time." Evan's voice was firm. "Eleanor didn't test whether I'd help only when it was convenient. She tested whether I'd see people when it cost me something. This costs us. We do it anyway." Michael studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but we need a plan that goes beyond just bleeding money and hoping it works out." They spent the next 3 days reaching out to every shelter, church, and community organization in Portland. Most were already overwhelmed by the cold snap, stretched beyond capacity. But a few agreed to partnership, sharing resources, coordinating services, ensuring no one fell through the cracks. Patricia helped draft emergency fundraising appeals. They sent them to everyone who'd ever donated, posted them on social media, reached out to local news stations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Portlanders, it turned out, didn't want their neighbors freezing on the streets any more than Evan did. Money came in, $5 from a college student, $5,000 from a retired doctor, everything in between. But more valuable were the volunteers. People showed up with blankets, warm clothes, thermoses of hot soup. A local hotel donated 10 rooms for the worst nights. A church opened its basement as overflow warming space. Eleanor's place became the coordination hub, and Evan found himself doing work he'd never imagined, managing volunteers, coordinating with city services, making decisions about who got limited hotel rooms and who had to settle for church basement cots. Every choice felt impossible, every decision a judgment about whose need was greatest. On the coldest night of December, the thermometer hit 12 degrees. The cafe was packed past capacity, people shoulder to shoulder seeking warmth. Evan moved through the crowd with coffee and soup, checking on the elderly and the sick, making sure no one was hypothermic or in crisis. He found a young woman in the corner, maybe 19, holding an infant wrapped in layers of inadequate blankets. The baby was maybe 3 months old, silent in that concerning way that suggested cold and hunger had sapped their energy. "Hey," Evan said gently, kneeling beside them. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up with exhausted eyes. "We just need to be warm, just for tonight." "When did the baby last eat?" "This morning. I'm breastfeeding, but I haven't had much to eat myself, so there's not much milk." Evan's chest tightened. "Stay here. I'll be right back." He found Teresa in the kitchen, explained the situation. Within 10 minutes, they'd prepared a high-calorie meal for the mother and warmed formula for the baby, kept on hand for exactly this kind of emergency. Evan brought both back to the corner, along with fresh blankets from their emergency supply. "I'm calling our hotel contact," he said. "You're getting a room tonight, both of you, somewhere warm and safe." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I can't pay." "Nobody's asking you to pay. What's your name?" "Jessica." "Jessica, I'm Evan. This is what we do here. We help. No strings. No judgment. Just help." "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Evan thought of Eleanor, of her notebook, of the question that had driven her experiment. Do I matter? "Because you're not strangers," he said simply. "You're neighbors, and neighbors help each other." The hotel room was secured within the hour. Evan drove Jessica and her baby there himself, carrying their few belongings up to a warm room with a real bed and a working bathroom. He left them with enough money for a few days of food and the cafe's number in case they needed anything. Driving back through frozen streets, Evan thought about how far Eleanor's $1 million had stretched. They'd spent most of it now, on the cafe, on operations, on moments like this where helping was expensive but necessary. The foundation account held maybe $70,000. At current burn rate, they'd be broke by spring. But they'd also fed 8,000 meals, employed 15 people who couldn't get hired elsewhere, provided warmth and safety to hundreds during this cold snap, created a community where people looked after each other. If Eleanor's money was gone by spring, at least it had been used the way she'd intended, to see people and meet their needs. Danny's Christmas wish list that year was surprisingly modest. When Evan asked what he wanted, his 7-year-old son thought carefully before answering. "Can we have Christmas at the cafe?" he asked. "And invite everyone who doesn't have somewhere else to go?" Evan's throat tightened. "Yeah, buddy, we can do that." They planned it together over the following week, a Christmas dinner open to anyone who needed somewhere to be. Volunteers signed up to cook turkey and ham, mashed potatoes and stuffing, pies and cookies. Local businesses donated food and decorations. A church donated a small Christmas tree, which Danny decorated with paper ornaments made by kids who came to the cafe with their parents. Christmas morning arrived cold but clear. The cafe opened at 10, and people began arriving immediately. The regulars, the occasional visitors, people who'd heard about the dinner and had nowhere else to go. Families with children, elderly folks alone, veterans and addicts, and people whose circumstances had left them isolated. Danny moved through the crowd like a small ambassador, making sure everyone had food, refilling drinks, distributing candy canes with democratic enthusiasm. Evan watched his son treat a homeless veteran with the same warmth he showed the volunteer doctor's family, making no distinction between circumstances. "Your kid's something special," Marcus said, appearing at Evan's elbow. "You know that, right?" "He learned it from his mother," Evan said automatically. "Sarah always saw people clearly." "Maybe, but he's learning it from you too, every day, watching you do this." Marcus gestured at the full cafe, the people eating and talking and laughing. "You're teaching him that kindness is action, not just intention." Teresa called everyone to attention around noon, asking if anyone wanted to share what they were grateful for. The responses came haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. "I'm grateful for this place," an elderly man said, "for being treated like I matter." "I'm grateful for second chances," Derek added, his voice steady. "For people who see who you're trying to be, not just who you were." "I'm grateful for my son," Evan heard himself say, "for the way he sees the world, with kindness and without judgment. He reminds me every day why this work matters." Danny stood on his chair, demanding to be heard with the unselfconscious confidence of childhood. "I'm grateful for Eleanor," he announced, "even though I never really knew her, because she taught my dad that being kind is the most important thing, and now we get to be kind to lots of people." The cafe erupted in applause, and Evan had to turn away to hide his tears. His 7-year-old son had understood Eleanor's lesson better than most adults, that kindness wasn't complicated or difficult. It was simply choosing to see people and respond to that scene with care. After dinner, as volunteers cleaned up and guests lingered over coffee and pie, a well-dressed couple approached Evan. He didn't recognize them, assumed they were volunteers he hadn't met yet. "Mr. Carter," the man said, "I'm James Morrison, and this is my wife Linda. Could we speak with you privately for a moment?" Something in their manner set off alarm bells, but Evan led them to the office. Once inside, James pulled out a business card identifying him as a partner at a major Portland law firm. "We've been following your work here with great interest," James began. "The cafe, the foundation, the community impact. It's remarkable what you've built in less than a year." "Thank you," Evan said cautiously, "but I have a feeling this isn't just a social visit." "It's not," Linda confirmed. "We want to help, significantly. James and I have discussed it extensively, and we'd like to make a substantial donation to the Eleanor Hale Foundation." Evan's pulse quickened. "How substantial?" $500,000. The number hit like a physical force. 500,000. That would sustain operations for at least 2 years, maybe 3 if they were careful. That would mean not worrying about next month's rent, about whether they could keep the heat on, about choosing between paying staff and feeding guests. "That's incredibly generous," Evan managed. "But I have to ask, why? Why this much?" James and Linda exchanged glances. Linda spoke, her voice thick with emotion. 20 years ago, I was where some of your guests are now. Homeless, addicted, absolutely certain I'd die on the streets. A stranger helped me, gave me a job, treated me with dignity, saw past my circumstances to who I could become. That stranger changed my life." She paused, collecting herself. "I got clean, went back to school, built a career, met James, created a life I never thought possible. But I've never forgotten what it felt like to be invisible, to have people look through me like I wasn't fully human. When I read about Eleanor's experiment, about what you're doing here, I recognized it. This is the same kind of scene that saved my life." "We can afford this donation," James added, "and we can't think of anything that would honor Linda's journey better than ensuring this place continues." Evan felt overwhelmed by gratitude and responsibility in equal measure. "There would be conditions, I assume? Requirements about how the money is used?" "Just one," Linda said. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing. See people, feed them, treat them with dignity. Don't change the fundamental mission to chase growth or efficiency or any of the things donors usually demand. Stay true to Eleanor's vision." "I can do that," Evan said, voice rough. "That's all I've been trying to do from the beginning." The donation was formalized the week after Christmas. With the foundation's finances suddenly secure, Evan found himself able to think beyond immediate survival for the first time since opening. He hired 2 more staff members, both people he'd been feeding for months who were ready to work. He upgraded kitchen equipment that had been held together with hope and duct tape. He established a small emergency fund to help guests with crises. Bus tickets to reach family, security deposits for apartments, medication they couldn't afford. But more than the money, Linda and James brought something unexpected: mentorship. Linda began volunteering at the cafe regularly, and her perspective as someone who'd lived both sides of poverty proved invaluable. She understood the shame that accompanied need, the careful pride that made accepting help difficult, the complex psychology of dependence and independence. "You're doing good work," she told Evan one January afternoon, "but you're also exhausting yourself. You can't sustain this pace indefinitely. There's too much to do." "There will always be too much to do," Linda interrupted gently. "The need is infinite. Your energy isn't. You have to find sustainable rhythms or you'll burn out, and then you can't help anyone." Her words echoed conversations Evan had been avoiding with himself. He was tired, bone tired, the kind of exhaustion that sleep didn't touch. He woke each morning with the weight of responsibility already pressing on his chest. He lay awake at night doing math that never quite worked, even with the new donation. He snapped at Danny sometimes, impatient with his son's needs when Evan had nothing left to give. "I don't know how to slow down," he admitted. "Every time I try to rest, I think about someone going hungry because I took time off." "That's not sustainable," Linda said firmly. "And it's not what Eleanor asked you to do. She asked you to see the need and meet it. She didn't ask you to destroy yourself in the process." But Evan didn't know how to find balance. The cafe had become his life, his purpose, the thing that gave meaning to Sarah's death and Eleanor's trust. Who was he without this work? Just a guy who'd lost his wife and gotten lucky with an inheritance? The cafe made him someone who mattered, someone doing important work. Didn't it? The question haunted him through January and into February. He found himself snapping at staff over small mistakes, micromanaging operations he'd previously trusted to others, staying late to redo work that was already perfectly adequate. Michael finally confronted him on a Tuesday evening after everyone else had gone home. "You're not okay," Michael said bluntly, "and it's starting to affect the cafe. Teresa's terrified of making mistakes. Derek thinks you're disappointed in him. The new hires are walking on eggshells. This isn't the environment you created. This isn't what Eleanor's place is supposed to be." Evan wanted to argue, to defend himself, but exhaustion made him honest. "I don't know how to do this without giving everything," he said. "Eleanor gave me everything she had. How can I give less?" "Eleanor gave you everything because she was dying and wanted to see if she'd mattered," Michael replied. "You're not dying, Evan. You're living, and you have a son who needs you present, not just physically here, but actually available. You have staff who need a leader, not a martyr. You have a community that needs this place to be sustainable, not brilliant for 6 months and then burned out." The words hit hard because they were true. Evan thought about Danny, about how many times recently he'd been too tired to read bedtime stories, too distracted to help with homework, too wrapped up in cafe problems to really listen when his son talked about school. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. "Start by taking a day off," Michael said. A real day. Not answering phone calls, not checking in, not thinking about the cafe. Spend it with Danny. Remember who you were before all this and who you want to be going forward. So Evan took a Saturday off, his first full day away from the cafe since opening. He and Danny spent it at the zoo, then got pizza, then watched movies on their couch until Danny fell asleep against his shoulder. It was ordinary, unremarkable, exactly what thousands of fathers and sons did every weekend. It was also exactly what Evan had been missing. Sunday morning, Danny woke him early with an unusual request. "Can we visit Eleanor's grave?" he asked. "I want to tell her about the cafe." They drove to the cemetery where Eleanor was buried, a modest plot she'd purchased before divesting herself of wealth. The headstone was simple: Eleanor Hale, 1945 to 2024. Beloved friend to those who saw her. Evan had chosen the epitaph himself, and seeing it carved in stone made Eleanor's death real in a way it hadn't been before. She was gone. She'd never know how her gift had multiplied, how her experiment had proven that some people would see her, how that small act of recognition had rippled outward into community and care. Danny placed flowers on the grave, daisies bought with his allowance money. "Hi, Eleanor," he said, speaking to the headstone with the unself-conscious directness of childhood. "I'm Danny. I drew dinosaurs with you once, but I don't think you remember because you were sick. I wanted to tell you that your cafe is really good. We fed almost 10,000 people, and my dad hired lots of people who needed jobs, and we're helping people be warm when it's cold." He paused, thinking. "Dad gets really tired sometimes. I think he's trying to make you proud. I think he's worried he's not doing it right, but I think you'd be proud anyway, because he's really nice to everyone, just like he was nice to you." Evan knelt beside his son, throat tight. "I hope we're doing this right," he said to Eleanor's memory. "I hope the cafe is what you wanted. I hope seeing all these people, feeding them, treating them with dignity, I hope that honors what you taught me." The cemetery was quiet except for wind in the trees. No answers came, because the dead don't speak. But Evan felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't felt since the lawyers had walked into his life with their impossible news. "Dad?" Danny asked. "Do you think Eleanor knows about the cafe and everything?" "I don't know, buddy, but I hope so." "I think she knows," Danny said with certainty. "I think she's watching, and I think she's happy." They stayed a few more minutes, then headed home. On the drive back, Evan made a decision. He'd take every Sunday off from now on. One day a week to be just a father, just himself, just a person rather than a mission. The cafe would survive without him for 24 hours. His son needed him more. Monday morning brought unexpected visitors, a film crew from a national news program wanting to do a story about Eleanor's place. Evan's first instinct was to refuse. The cafe wasn't about publicity or recognition. It was about quiet dignity, small kindnesses, seeing people without making them spectacles. But Michael convinced him otherwise. "This isn't about you," he said. "It's about showing people that Eleanor's vision works, that pay what you can models can succeed, that treating people with dignity creates community. Other cities could replicate this. Other people could start their own Eleanor's places." The interview aired 3 weeks later, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. The cafe's donation page crashed from traffic. Emails poured in from across the country. People wanting to start similar cafes, organizations wanting to partner, individuals wanting to volunteer or donate, or simply say that the story had moved them. Evan read every email, humbled by the response. Eleanor's experiment had been private, personal, conducted in the shadows of Portland's streets. But what it had revealed, that kindness mattered, that being seen was fundamental to human dignity, that small acts multiplied into massive impact, that was universal. Within 2 months, 3 other cities had opened Eleanor's Place franchises, not franchises in the commercial sense, but independent cafes built on the same principles of dignity and pay-what-you-can service. Evan consulted with each, sharing what he'd learned, helping them avoid the mistakes he'd made. The movement grew beyond anything he'd imagined. Eleanor's experiment, conducted alone and in obscurity, was becoming a national conversation about how societies treat their most vulnerable members. But success brought new pressures. Donors wanted more cafes, faster expansion, greater impact. Board members, they had a board now, formalized and official, pushed for efficiency metrics and outcome measurements. Everyone wanted to quantify what Evan knew was fundamentally qualitative: the value of being seen, the impact of dignity, the worth of treating people as human. "We're losing something," he told Patricia during a particularly contentious board meeting in April. "The more we grow, the more we have to systematize, the more we're treating this like a business instead of a mission." "All organizations face this tension," Patricia replied. "The question is what you're willing to compromise and what you'll protect no matter what." Evan thought about Eleanor in her corner booth, about Danny drawing pictures with her, about the quiet kindness that had started everything. That was worth protecting. The intimacy, the personal connection, the individual recognition of worth, that couldn't be sacrificed to growth or efficiency. "We protect the scene," he decided. "Everything else is negotiable, but we protect the fundamental act of seeing people and responding to that scene with care. That's non-negotiable." With that principle established, Evan began pushing back against expansion pressure. They'd help other cafes start, but they wouldn't franchise or corporatize. They'd grow the foundation's impact, but they wouldn't sacrifice quality for quantity. They'd measure outcomes where possible, but they'd never reduce human dignity to metrics. Some donors left, some board members resigned, but others, people who understood what Eleanor's experiment had really been about, stayed and strengthened. The foundation stabilized around a core mission that honored Eleanor's vision while building something sustainable. On the first anniversary of Eleanor's Place opening, Evan stood in the full cafe and looked around at what they'd built. 16,000 meals served, 23 people employed, countless moments of dignity preserved, of hunger satisfied, of isolation transformed into community. 3 other cities with their own Eleanor's Places. A national conversation about compassion and economic justice. And in the corner booth where Eleanor had once sat invisible and dying, testing whether anyone would see her, Danny sat doing homework while occasionally helping bus tables, learning the same lesson his father had learned. That kindness was action, that dignity was a choice, that seeing people was the most important work anyone could do. Evan thought about Eleanor's final question, the one that had driven her to give away everything. Did she matter? Yes, he thought. You mattered then. You matter now. You'll matter as long as people remember that how we treat each other defines who we are, and that mattering, that fundamental recognition of human worth, was Eleanor's true legacy. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late May, 18 months after Eleanor's death. Evan was reviewing applications for a new kitchen manager when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Mr. Carter, this is Robert Harrison. We met when Eleanor's estate was settled. Evan's stomach dropped. Lawyers calling was rarely good news. I remember. Is there a problem? Not a problem, an opportunity. Could you come to our office this afternoon? There's something we need to discuss regarding Eleanor's estate. The lawyer's tone was carefully neutral, revealing nothing. Evan agreed to a 2:00 meeting, then spent the next 4 hours imagining worst-case scenarios. Had he violated some condition of the bequest? Was the foundation being sued? Had he somehow misused Eleanor's trust? Patricia met him at the law firm, her presence both reassuring and alarming. You asked her to come? Evan asked Harrison when they were shown into a conference room. I thought legal counsel would be appropriate for this discussion. 3 lawyers sat across from them. Harrison and 2 others Evan didn't recognize. Documents were spread across the polished table, official and intimidating. Mr. Carter, Harrison began, when Eleanor established her estate plan, she created multiple contingencies based on different possible outcomes. The bequest to you was one element. There were others, triggered by specific conditions. I don't understand. The younger lawyer, a woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. Eleanor established a trust separate from her initial bequest to you. This trust was designed to activate if certain criteria were met within 2 years of her death. Those criteria have now been met. Evan's confusion must have shown, because Harrison explained further. Eleanor wanted to see if her initial gift would be used as she'd hoped, to see people and meet needs with dignity. She established monitoring systems, ways to verify that her trust had been placed wisely. The trust document specified that if you successfully operated a charitable endeavor serving vulnerable populations for 18 months or longer, if you employed people others wouldn't hire, if you created sustainable community impact, then a secondary trust would activate. A secondary trust? Evan's voice came out strangled. The kind-eyed lawyer slid a document across the table. Eleanor set aside $5 million, she said quietly, to be released to the Eleanor Hale Foundation if you proved worthy of the responsibility. By every measure she established, you've exceeded her expectations. The room tilted. $5 million. Not the $1 million that had already transformed everything, but $5 million more. Enough to expand to a dozen cities, enough to feed hundreds of thousands of people, enough to change lives on a scale Evan couldn't begin to imagine. He struggled for words. Why didn't anyone mention this before? Because Eleanor forbade it, Harrison said. She didn't want the possibility of additional funds to influence how you use the initial bequest. She wanted to see what you'd do with $1 million and no promise of more. Your choices over the past 18 months proved you'd use resources exactly as she'd hoped, to see people and treat them with dignity. Patricia was reading the trust document, her expression stunned. This is legitimate, she confirmed. And there are very few restrictions. The money must be used for charitable purposes aligned with Eleanor's vision, but you have substantial discretion in implementation. Evan thought about the past 18 months, the struggles, the impossible choices, the nights lying awake doing math that never quite worked. He'd built something sustainable, yes, but always on the edge, always one major crisis away from collapse. $5 million would change that completely, but it would also change him, change the foundation, change what Eleanor's place meant. "I need time to think," he said. The lawyer seemed surprised. People didn't usually need time to think about receiving $5 million. "Of course," Harrison said. "The trust is yours whenever you're ready to claim it. There's no deadline, no urgency. Eleanor wanted you to have the freedom to choose how and when to expand her legacy." Evan left the law firm in a daze, Patricia beside him talking about possibilities and implications and legal requirements. He heard none of it. His mind was stuck on Eleanor's final test, because that's what this was, wasn't it? Another test, more subtle than the first. She'd tested whether he'd see her without money. Then she'd tested whether he'd use her money wisely. Now she was testing whether he'd handle success with the same integrity he'd shown in struggle. That evening, Evan sat Danny down after dinner and explained the situation in 8-year-old terms. "Eleanor left us more money," he said. "A lot more. Enough to help a lot more people." Danny considered this seriously. "That's good, right? More people getting help?" "Maybe. Or maybe it changes things in ways that aren't good. Makes the cafe too big, too complicated. Sometimes when things grow too fast, they lose what made them special." "What made our cafe special?" Evan thought about Eleanor in her corner booth, about coffee and toast given without ceremony, about dignity preserved in small kindnesses. "People feel seen here," he said finally. "They feel like they matter. I'm worried that if we get too big, we'll stop seeing individuals and start seeing numbers." Danny was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What would Mom say?" The question pierced Evan's heart. Sarah had been gone for 6 years, but Danny still invoked her wisdom in moments that mattered. "Your mom would say to remember why we started," Evan answered. "To help people, not to build an empire. To see needs and meet them, not to chase growth for growth's sake." "Then that's what you should do," Danny said with the simple clarity of childhood. "Use the money to help more people, but don't forget to see them." Over the following weeks, Evan wrestled with the decision. He consulted with his board, with Patricia, with the staff at Eleanor's place. He visited the other cafes that had started in different cities, seeing what worked and what struggled. He talked to guests, asking what the cafe meant to them and whether they'd want it to expand. The answers were mixed. Some people urged growth. Imagine the impact, they said. Imagine how many lives could be changed. Others counseled caution. Don't sacrifice quality for quantity, they warned. Don't lose the intimacy that makes this place work. Linda Morrison provided the perspective that finally clarified things. She found Evan in the cafe's office one June afternoon, staring at financial projections that showed a dozen different futures. "You're overthinking this," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. $5 million demands careful thought." "It does, but you're treating this like Eleanor's testing you again, and I don't think that's what this is." Evan looked up, surprised. "What else would it be?" "Trust," Linda said simply. "Eleanor tested you with the first million because she didn't know you well enough to trust you fully, but she set up this second trust before she died, before she saw what you'd do. That means she already believed you'd handle it well. This isn't a test. It's a gift from someone who trusted you completely." The distinction mattered. A test implied the possibility of failure, of not measuring up. Trust implied confidence, belief in his judgment, and character. "So what do I do with it?" Evan asked. "What does your gut tell you?" He thought about the question seriously. What did he want? Not what should he do, or what would be most efficient, or what would help the most people. But what did he, Evan Carter, former cafe worker and single father, actually want? "I want to help more people," he said slowly, "but I don't want to run a national organization. I want to stay connected to the actual work, to the individual people we're serving. I want Danny to grow up seeing this work as normal, as just what people do for each other. And I want to make sure we're building something that lasts beyond me, beyond Eleanor, beyond any one person's vision." Linda smiled. Then do that. Use the money to strengthen what you've already built, to support other cafes without controlling them, to create a network of places where people are seen and fed with dignity. But stay rooted here, in this cafe, in this community. Let others do the expansion. You do the seeing. Her words crystallized something Evan had been circling without naming. He didn't need to be everything to everyone. He just needed to be faithful to what Eleanor had taught him, to see people and respond to that seeing with care. The plan came together over the summer. The $5 million would be divided strategically, $2 million to endow Eleanor's Place Portland, ensuring its permanent sustainability, $1 million to create a support fund for other Eleanor's Places, providing grants and technical assistance without demanding control, $1 million to establish a training program, teaching the principles of dignity-centered service to organizations across the country. The final $1 million would be held in reserve for emergencies and opportunities they couldn't yet anticipate. Evan would remain executive director of the Portland Cafe and the foundation, but they'd hire professional staff to handle the network coordination and training programs. He'd stay focused on what he did best: seeing individuals, building community, showing up with coffee and toast, and the message that people mattered. The board approved the plan unanimously. Patricia handled the legal paperwork. By September, the structures were in place. But before making any public announcement, Evan did something that felt necessary. He took Danny to Eleanor's grave on a cool autumn morning, carrying flowers and a letter he'd written explaining what they were doing with her trust. He read the letter aloud at her graveside, detailing every decision and the reasoning behind it. Danny listened quietly, then added his own message. "We're going to help lots more people," he told the headstone. "But we're not going to forget that they're people. Dad says that's what you cared about most, that people remembered you were a person, not just money. We remember. And we'll make sure everyone else remembers too." Evan folded the letter and placed it beneath the flowers, a symbolic gesture that Eleanor would never read, but that mattered nonetheless. "I hope we're doing right by you," he said quietly. "I hope wherever you are, you can see that your experiment worked. People can be kind. They can see each other. They can build communities based on dignity instead of transactions. You proved that. We're just trying to prove it again and again." The autumn brought changes beyond the financial expansion. Derek, who'd started as a dishwasher struggling with his past, approached Evan with an unexpected request. "I want to go back to school," he said. "Get my GED, maybe take some community college classes. But I'm scared if I cut my hours here, I won't be able to afford my room." Evan had been waiting for this moment, had been planning for it. "The foundation is starting a scholarship program," he said, "for staff who want to pursue education or training, room and board assistance, tuition coverage, books, whatever you need to move forward. You interested?" Derek's eyes went wide. "You're serious?" "Completely. You've proven yourself here. You've become someone our guests trust, someone other staff look up to. But you're also young, Derek. You've got your whole life ahead of you. If education is part of that life, we want to support it." "Why would you do that?" "Because Eleanor taught me that investing in people is never wasted," Evan said. "You invested in yourself by showing up here every day, by doing the work, by being honest when you made mistakes. Now we're investing in you so you can go further." Derek enrolled in GED classes that fall while maintaining reduced hours at the cafe. 2 other staff members joined the scholarship program: Teresa pursuing culinary certification and Michael working toward an accounting degree he'd abandoned years ago. The scholarship program became one of Eleanor's Place's most powerful features. It demonstrated that the cafe wasn't just feeding people temporarily, but investing in their long-term flourishing. Guests saw staff members studying during breaks, pursuing education, building futures. It made possibility visible in ways that charity alone never could. Jessica, the young mother Evan had helped during the winter cold snap, returned to the cafe in October. She looked transformed, healthy, confident, dressed in professional clothes. "I wanted to thank you," she said, finding Evan during the lunch rush. "For the hotel room, for the help. I got connected with services that night, found transitional housing, got childcare assistance. I've been working for 6 months now. I have an apartment. My daughter's thriving." "That's wonderful," Evan said, genuinely moved. I'm so glad things worked out. They worked out because someone saw me when I was invisible, Jessica replied. Someone treated me like I deserved help, like my daughter deserved safety. You gave me more than a hotel room. You gave me dignity when I'd forgotten I deserved it. She pulled an envelope from her purse. I can't repay everything you did, but I wanted to pay forward what I can. This is for the next mother with a baby who needs somewhere warm to sleep. The envelope contained $200, probably a significant portion of Jessica's paycheck. You don't have to do this, Evan said. I know, but I want to. I want to be part of the circle, receiving when I needed it, giving when I can. That's what community means, right? Evan accepted the donation with the same seriousness he'd accepted Rose's $500, Eleanor's $1 million, the Morrisons' $5 million, because the amount didn't matter. What mattered was the transformation from invisible to seen, from helpless to empowered, from isolated to connected. Danny's 8th birthday fell in late October. For his party, he asked for something specific. Can people donate to Eleanor's place instead of giving me presents? He asked. I have enough toys, but there are people who need food. Evan's heart swelled with pride and something like grief. His son was growing up in the shadow of loss. Sarah's death, Eleanor's experiment, the daily evidence of suffering that filled their cafe. But instead of making him hard or cynical, it was making him compassionate. Are you sure? Evan asked. Birthdays are supposed to be fun. You're allowed to want things for yourself. I do want things for myself, Danny said seriously. I want people to not be hungry. I want everyone to have somewhere warm to sleep. I want the cafe to stay open forever. Those are things for me because they make me happy. The birthday party raised $3,000 in donations. Danny spent the day at the cafe serving cake to guests and explaining to anyone who'd listen that helping people was the best birthday present anyone could give him. Watching his son move through the crowd, Evan thought about Eleanor's question. Did she matter? She'd tested it with coffee and toast, documented it in her notebook, structured her entire final experiment around discovering whether human worth existed independent of wealth. The answer was yes. Unequivocally, yes. But the answer went deeper than Eleanor had lived to discover. She'd mattered because of who she was. Yes. But she also mattered because of what she'd set in motion. This cafe, this community, this network of places where people were seen and fed and treated as fully human. Her mattering had multiplied. $1 million had become 5, had become 16 Eleanor's places across 9 states, had become a scholarship program and an emergency fund and a training network. But more than the money or the programs, Eleanor's mattering had become a philosophy, a way of seeing the world that spread person by person, interaction by interaction. The winter holiday season brought an unexpected development. A major foundation reached out, interested in partnering with Eleanor's Place to expand the model nationally. They offered $10 million over 5 years, with the goal of establishing Eleanor's Places in 50 cities. The board was thrilled. Patricia was cautiously optimistic, but Evan felt something in his gut that was closer to dread than excitement. He requested a meeting with the foundation's representatives, wanting to understand their vision before committing to anything. We see tremendous potential in your model, the program officer explained. Pay what you can dining combined with dignity-centered service addresses both immediate hunger and systemic dignity deficits. We'd like to scale this significantly. Scale how? Evan asked. Evan Chassis. Standardization, franchising, quality metrics, outcome measurement. We develop a comprehensive manual for cafe operations, train managers centrally, ensure consistent service delivery across all locations. Think of it like a non-profit franchise. Same quality everywhere, same impact, same brand recognition. Everything about the proposal made Evan's skin crawl. Standardization, franchising, brand recognition. These were corporate concepts being applied to human dignity, reducing Eleanor's experiment to a scalable business model. Can I be honest with you? He said carefully. What you're describing sounds efficient, but it also sounds like exactly what Eleanor was testing against. She wanted to know if people would see her as an individual, as a unique human being. Standardization is the opposite of that. It's treating people as categories rather than individuals. The program officer looked confused. But standardization ensures quality. It guarantees that someone in Miami gets the same excellent service as someone in Portland. Maybe, Evan said, but it also guarantees they get the same service. Eleanor's Place works because it's responsive to individual needs, individual communities, individual moments. The cafe in Chicago should look different from the one in Portland because Chicago is different from Portland. The people are different. The needs are different. Cookie-cutter responses to human need miss the whole point. He thought about Eleanor in her corner booth, about how what she'd needed wasn't just food, but the specific recognition of her specific humanity. No manual could teach that. No standardization could replicate it. I appreciate the offer, Evan said finally, but I don't think this partnership would honor Eleanor's vision. We'll continue growing organically, supporting cafes that emerge from their communities rather than imposing a model from the outside. But thank you for believing in this work. The foundation representatives were clearly disappointed, but they accepted his decision. After they left, several board members questioned whether Evan had just turned down an opportunity to help hundreds of thousands of people. Maybe I did, he acknowledged, but I'd rather help 10,000 people well than 100,000 people poorly. Eleanor's experiment was never about scale. It was about whether one person could matter to one other person. That's the thing worth protecting. Linda Morrison spoke up, her voice firm. Evan's right. I've watched organizations chase scale and lose their souls. The magic of Eleanor's Place isn't the pay-what-you-can model. Plenty of places have tried that. The magic is that people feel seen here. You can't standardize that. You can't franchise human connection. If we try, we'll end up with 50 cafes that feed people's bodies but starve their dignity. The board ultimately supported Evan's decision, though a few members resigned over the disagreement. It was painful, but it also clarified what the foundation stood for. Not maximum impact, but meaningful connection. Not helping the most people, but helping people most humanly. As winter deepened and they approached the 2-year anniversary of Eleanor's death, Evan found himself reflecting on everything that had changed. The cafe had served over 25,000 meals. The foundation had assets of over $6 million. 16 cities had Eleanor's Places, each adapted to its community's specific needs. The scholarship program was supporting 8 people pursuing education. The emergency fund had helped 43 individuals with crisis intervention. But what mattered more than the numbers were the stories. Jessica finding housing and stability, Derek pursuing education, Rose returning to donate after rebuilding her life, Teresa becoming head chef at a downtown restaurant while still volunteering at the cafe on weekends, Michael starting his own consulting practice helping nonprofits with financial management. Every person who'd been seen had gone on to see others. The kindness multiplied exponentially, rippling outward in ways that couldn't be measured or counted. On the anniversary of Eleanor's death, Evan organized a memorial service at the cafe. He expected maybe 20 people, staff, board members, a few regular guests. Over 200 showed up. They came from across the country, people whose lives had been touched by Eleanor's experiment. Some had eaten at Eleanor's Places and found the help they needed to rebuild. Some had worked at the cafes and discovered their worth. Some had simply heard the story and been inspired to treat others with more dignity. Evan stood before the crowd, Eleanor's worn notebook in his hands. Eleanor Hale spent her final months testing a question, he began. She wanted to know if she mattered, if anyone would see her as fully human without the money that had defined her life. Her experiment was small, personal, conducted in the shadows of Portland's streets. But what she discovered was huge. He opened the notebook, reading selected entries aloud. The documentation of cruelty and kindness, the careful accounting of who saw her and who looked away. Eleanor found her answer, Evan continued. She mattered. She mattered to me, to my son, to everyone who's been touched by what her question set in motion. But more importantly, her question taught us something essential. Everyone matters. The test Eleanor conducted on herself applies to every person, housed or homeless, wealthy or poor, powerful or powerless. Do they matter? Will we see them? Will we respond to their humanity with our own? He looked around the packed cafe, seeing faces of every age and circumstance. Eleanor left money, yes, but that's not her real legacy. Her legacy is the question itself and our answer to it. Every meal we serve is an answer. Every person we hire is an answer. Every time we choose to see someone whose society has rendered invisible, We're answering Eleanor's question. Yes, you matter. You matter infinitely. Danny stood and asked if he could say something. Evan nodded, helping his son onto a chair so everyone could see him. I never really knew Eleanor, Danny said, his 8-year-old voice clear and strong. But I know what she taught my dad. She taught him that being kind is the most important thing, that people deserve to be seen, that it doesn't matter if someone has money or a house or nice clothes. They're still people who matter. He paused, looking around the room. My mom died when I was little. I don't remember her much, but my dad says she was kind too, like Eleanor. So I think maybe kindness is something that keeps going even after people die. Like they plant seeds, and the seeds grow into more kindness, and that kindness helps more people, and those people plant more seeds. His simple metaphor captured what Evan had been trying to articulate for 2 years. Eleanor's kindness, expressed in her willingness to test whether she mattered, in her trust of Evan with her wealth, in her hope that people could be better than she'd often found them, had indeed planted seeds. Those seeds had grown into this cafe, this community, this network of places where people were seen and fed and treated as fully human. And the harvest was ongoing, multiplying, spreading far beyond what Eleanor could have imagined. After the memorial, as people lingered over coffee and conversation, Michael approached Evan with a thoughtful expression. You know what Eleanor proved? He said. She proved that vulnerability creates connection. She made herself completely vulnerable, stripped of wealth, status, protection, and in that vulnerability she found you, found us, found this whole community of people who believe that human dignity matters more than economic status. She also proved that wealth isn't what makes people matter, Teresa added, joining the conversation. I spent 2 years in prison thinking I didn't matter because of my mistakes. Working here taught me that I matter because I'm human, period. That's Eleanor's real gift, not the money, but the truth that human worth is inherent, not earned. Their words articulated what Evan had felt but struggled to express. Eleanor's experiment had revealed something profound about human nature, that beneath the layers of class and status and economic circumstance, people long to be seen, to matter, to connect. And when given the chance, when treated with dignity regardless of their ability to pay, most people reciprocated with their own dignity and care. That evening, after everyone had left and the cafe was clean and quiet, Evan sat in Eleanor's corner booth with Danny drowsing against his shoulder. Through the windows, he could see Portland's streets, the same streets Eleanor had walked, testing her question, documenting humanity's response to her invisible presence. She'd found her answer, and in finding it, she'd given Evan his purpose, his community, his way of transforming grief into meaning. He thought about Sarah, about how her death had shattered him, left him raising Danny alone and barely surviving. He thought about Eleanor, dying and desperate to know if she'd mattered. He thought about the impossible intersection of those two lives with his own, how loss and kindness had collided to create something larger than any individual story. Dad, Danny mumbled, half asleep, do you think we did good? Do you think Eleanor would be happy? Evan looked around the cafe, at the tables where thousands had eaten, at the kitchen where staff who'd been dismissed elsewhere had found purpose, at the corner booth where an old woman had sat invisible until someone finally saw her. Yeah, buddy, he said softly. I think she'd be very happy. I think she'd say we passed her test. We saw people. We treated them with dignity. We proved that kindness matters, that human connection is real, that everyone deserves to be seen. Danny nodded, satisfied, and drifted back towards sleep. Evan stayed a while longer, holding his son, thinking about Eleanor's notebook and all the entries she'd written, all the moments of kindness and cruelty she'd documented. He thought about adding his own entry, his own documentation of what the past 2 years had taught him. But he didn't need to write it down. The cafe itself was the documentation, physical evidence that Eleanor's question had been answered, that her experiment had succeeded, that the simple act of seeing people and treating them with dignity could change everything. Outside, Portland's winter rain began to fall, washing the streets clean. Inside Eleanor's place, Evan Carter sat with his sleeping son, surrounded by the legacy of a woman who'd tested whether she mattered, and discovered that everyone, absolutely everyone, mattered infinitely. The cafe would open again tomorrow. More people would come, hungry and hoping to be seen. And they would be seen, every single one. Because Eleanor Hale had once asked a question, and Evan Carter had answered it with coffee and toast, and the unwavering belief that human dignity was sacred. That was Eleanor's legacy. That was the gift that kept multiplying. That was the answer that would echo far beyond Portland, far beyond their lifetimes, proving again and again that small acts of kindness, witnessed and returned, could transform the world one person at a time. And in the quiet of that winter evening, with rain falling and his son sleeping in the cafe waiting for tomorrow's hungry people, Evan knew with absolute certainty that Eleanor Hale had mattered, would always matter, because she'd taught him to see. And seeing, he'd learned, was everything.